2025 ended without military breakthrough and without a quick peace. And Donald Trump did not end the war in 24 hours or 3 days, not in 11 months either. After Zelensky talks with Trump in Florida, Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk said the end of peace negotiations is still very far away. It may be the most sober description of where we are. So what do the negotiations really mean? And what did 2025 tell us about the bigger geopolitical picture? Joining me now is Stanislav Belkovsky, a political analyst and publicist. Stanislav, welcome, and let's dive in. It's my pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for your invitation. Hello.
Hi. So, Stanislav, the peace talks in Florida looked like a political show to me. And Trump told the Ukrainian president that Russia wishes the Ukrainians prosperity and better life. Zelensky couldn't barely hide the irony on his face. At the same time, Ukraine has just lived through another massive air attack, including in Kyiv. Russia is clearly trying to break Ukrainians psychologically and kill as many as it can. So what is your reading of these talks? What did you notice that maybe most people may have missed?
The contradictions between parties are still very high, and Donald Trump had not enough vehicles of pressure onto Vladimir Putin and Kremlin to bring peace closer. Though both parties are very close to so-called Trump-Putin pact, concentrated on the natural resources of Russia and access to Russian Arctics and Northern Sea route, which is a subject of primary interests of Donald Trump and the business circles close to American president. Trump offered to Vladimir Putin the normalization. Putin would turn from his Hitler position and niche obtained in 2022 into back to the status of normal leader with whom any business as usual is quite viable. Trump is prepared to lift, at least partially, the sanctions imposed onto Russia since not just 2022, but 2014, since Crimea annexation and start of war in Donbass. But nonetheless, still, Vladimir Putin is unprepared to stop the war on such conditions, because the war on the whole, from Vladimir Putin's point of view, had two goals. Of course, he's not interested in endless war. He understands how painful this war is for Russia itself, though he does not any catastrophical perception of this situation, contrary to several forecasts. But this goal number two was to get the power loyal to Kremlin and Kyiv, the pro-Kremlin Ukrainian power. The goal number one, the primary goal of this war, was to make the United States, to bring the United States compulsory to dialogue onto the destiny of the world and the role of Russian Federation and Vladimir Putin in this changing world. And the goal number one is almost achieved. Washington is prepared for such a dialogue, is prepared for pact with Vladimir Putin. But the goal number two, to get loyal Kyiv, is not yet achieved, and Russia has not become much closer to this goal, despite relative military successes in the past years. And successes reached at the very, very high price for Russian Federation itself. So Vladimir Putin is hopeful that he can show his military victory by spring of the next year, and in such way to make Ukraine to accept the currently existing conditions, proposed already in August at the meeting with Trump in Anchorage, Alaska. And he persuades Trump that he's trying to persuade Trump, RF and USA could get back to the negotiation table some later in spring, when the war is over. And if we analyze the personal priorities of American president, he is prepared for this pact with Putin right now. And if everything depended just on his personal willingness and the position of his closest associates like Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner, his special invoice to the question, to the topic of the war in Europe, he would be much closer to those negotiations on business with Putin. But still, Donald Trump is dependent on American public opinion, on the considerable part of his constituents, on some part of American Republican political establishment, which would not understand any negotiations with Putin before the war is stopped. And that's why Trump is still trying to play this role of mediator of this conflict, though realizing that he's not so much powerful to put stop to it right now.
And right after the meeting, Moscow again named its condition for a ceasefire. Ukraine must withdraw its forces from Donetsk and Luhansk. Well, nothing new, but what was your reaction? Russia knows Ukrainians will not leave their land. So what is the real purpose of this demand?
No, not Luhansk, namely Donetsk and Slaviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration, first and foremost. Yeah. And second key point is the destiny of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, of course. And but Putin pins it hopes that Trump's pressure onto Vladimir Zelensky could be efficient with regard to American arms and American intelligence information granted to Ukraine, which Ukraine maybe cannot do without. So, of course, Ukraine is more dependent on Trump's decisions than Putin's Russia. Though sanctions imposed by Donald Trump against Rosneft and Lukoil showed Washington still has some mechanism how to impact Russia and Putin's decisions. But Putin is hopeful that Trump's position, both as far as politics, business, and psychology are concerned together, is closer to himself, to Kremlin's position, than to needs and demands of Ukraine. That's why Putin is hopeful Trump would play this role, and if and when Trump decides not to be an intermediary anymore, to step down from this conflict, and to let Russia, Ukraine, and Europe to decide its destiny on themselves, it would bring to Vladimir Putin another advantage. This is the primary hope of Kremlin's master.
But if Russia truly believed it was winning, well, it definitely shows the world it is. Would it be why they are pushing so hard for talks on its own terms and conditions right now?
Because Putin is very highly interested in negotiations with Trump on this pact, which cannot be officially started before the war is over. And so he's hopeful that he can back to those negotiations in several months after the war is over on his conditions. That's but this, because of course he's very much interested in his normalization and lifting of sanctions and the big business with Trump, and in finding in such way his new place, his new niche in the modern world, which is no more America-centric world. And that is maybe the most dramatic and most important result of the year 2025 in global politics and in the destiny of the modern civilization.
And looking ahead to 2026, what could actually change the balance? A diplomatic breakthrough, some military shift on the front line, or a collapse of illusion about Russia on the West?
In the West, there are no illusions about Russia. There is no more solid West anymore, because contrary to famous thinker Samuel Huntington, who has proclaimed that the wars between civilizations are the basic vehicle of humans' history. I would say the wars within civilizations, internal civilizational wars, are much more important for this history than the clashes between different civilizations. Now we are heading from America-centric world to this poly-civilizational world, under the conditions of which the fighting within Christian civilization, like between Russia and Ukraine as an example, and the new stage, it's a clash between America and Europe, because Europe, which is no more junior ally of the United States under the conditions of the New World, but becomes the competitor, and the dangerous competitor, toxic competitor to the United States. Because being no more global superpower and proclaiming and outspokenly and officially in the National Security Strategy of 2025, published about a month ago, the United States, under Donald Trump, still want to keep its control over several important mechanisms in the modern economy. First and foremost, the role of US dollar as a reserve currency, and in this connection, the euro as a competitor to dollar, and any damage to the European Union, leading to dissolution, disassemblement of this very efficient union of national statehoods, would, of course, weaken euro, and in such way could be lucrative for American politics with regard to dollar. Secondly, America is striving to keep its control over the basic logistic chains in the different parts of the world, including the Northern Sea Route, the importance of which is growing partially due to the global warming, which both Trump and Putin doubt this global warming, but they act as if they believe in global warming, contrary to their public sayings on that. And thirdly, America is still interested to manipulate, to have the vehicles, the mechanisms, instruments to manipulate or at least to keep the key influence onto international fuel prices, oil prices primarily. And now we see the attempt, in my opinion, of Donald Trump and the businesses connected with him, including the businesses of Sunni monarchies of the Gulf countries, to take over the infrastructure of oil and gas supplies from Russia to Europe. We see it with what would happen probably with the international assets of Lukoil, Russian oil corporation, the Nice Serbian oil corporation, and as a top goal, the Ukrainian gas transportation system, which would be used to deliver the natural gas of Russian and Central Asian origin to Europe through Ukrainian territory, but as American gas, but on the borders with Russia and Central Asian countries. That's why there is a big basis of cooperation between the Trump's US and Putin's Russia in their common fighting against European Union. And this topic would influence the international politics and the destiny of the big war in Europe in 2026 to a very important extent, to a very considerable extent.
Right. Stanislav, I listened to your episode, which correctly, I think, translating, Die of Horror. And as far as I understood, you said you were expected the war might end in 2025, but it didn't. Is it right?
Yes, I was hopeful that the war could be ended in 2025.
Yeah.
Maybe I underestimated the will and willingness of Vladimir Putin to show his military victory and the inevitability of this victory directly without the framework of negotiations with Ukraine through US and European partners. And secondly, of course, we entered the new reality under the conditions of which America and Europe are not together anymore. And moreover, they commence to be harsh competitors under those conditions.
And also in the same episode, you described Putin's logic quite clearly, that he wants a deal that brings international normalization, as you said previously, and also relief from sanctions. What does Putin actually want to buy with diplomacy, except that? time, legitimacy, money, or all of it together?
He, first and foremost, he wants to show the power of time resource. Because for many years, Vladimir Putin has emphasized that the advantage in time is a basic advantage of the modern world. If you are less powerful, not so rich as your competitor, as your opponent, but you have much more time than himself, you are almost victor. And because and having the resource of patience stemming from this abundance of time. Because, for instance, Donald Trump has its intermediate Congress elections in 11 months. Europe is torn to different parts by political conflicts and has numerous general elections next year as well, or at least in the coming 2 years, like France. Putin has nothing like it. He has no elections, no constituents, no power terms, limitations, and so on and so forth. And that's why he can wait, contrary to all other parts of the conflict, all other parties of this war, which cannot wait so long. That's his biggest bet on his time advantage. And for instance, Donald Trump is talking about, it's to a certain extent a joke, but a serious joke with an element of seriousness. Donald Trump offers to Ukraine security guarantees for 15 years. Vladimir Zelensky is talking about 30, 50 years. Does it mean that Trump and Zelensky do estimate the life expectancy, lifespan of Vladimir Putin's differently? Because the source of danger for Ukraine is Vladimir Putin personally, first and foremost. Because regardless of any interest connected with this war, we should recognize that this war is primarily his personal war, stemming from his world perception and a heap of psychological problems.
Absolutely agree with you, Stanislav. But just let me ask you about another point from this Die of Horror episode. I was watching it closely. And you called Trump a trickster figure, so unpredictable in tone, but very consistent in actions. Do you believe Trump is building really a peace plan or just building some leverage using peace as a tool?
Trump does not the concrete plan in the pure sense of this word. But being a trickster, Trump reflects the very distinct trends of the modern history. He has come to break the old world and to set the foundations for the new world order. Moving from America-centric world where the West and the free world exists as a solid unit, to the new Polish civilizational world where America does no more export its samples, its models, political, social, intellectual, cultural, and so on and so forth. And as I mentioned, under such transitional conditions, under the conditions of such transition, Trump still wants to play the key role in the world, but not as a moral nor political center, not as a global moderator responsible, both politically, militarily, and financially for this world order. No more responsibility, but advantages stemming from the power of America. And in this way, he would play on contradictions between his former allies, now opponents, and attract different dictators, autocrats from different parts of the world for cooperation in achieving his goals. Let's see that his key partners now are the Sunni monarchies of the Persian Gulf, Arab Gulf, because not just for America, but for Trump himself as a big businessman, and for the formal and informal members of his large family, those monarchies are important sources of money, of funds. And that's why Trump's politics are to a certain extent dictated by those interests, which are to a certain extent associated with Kremlin interests, because Vladimir Putin, through Kirill Dmitriev and some others, representatives of his inner circle, is connected to those monarchs. And not in vain has been Kirill Dmitriev placed as a special Putin's envoy to Ukrainian war, as well as Stephen Witkoff, which has been the actual Qatar lobbyist for ages, and the businessman whose personal prosperity is based on Qatar money and Saudi Arabian money to a certain extent as well. Jared Kushner is here not in vain as well, because Jared Kushner, as we know, is a top manager of Donald Trump's, and his formal and informal implicit or explicit cooperation with Saudi Arabia and Prince Mohammed bin Salman. So all this number of interests dictates the Trump priorities very considerably. At the same time, we should consider Trump as a historical figure, which leads us from one epoch to another. And this is a very peculiar combination of factors and motives which would stipulate the logic of Trump politics and concrete moves in coming year and at all.
I've heard these days a quote that Donald Trump is not building new rules in the world, but he's just destroying the old rules. Do you agree with that?
The new rules would come instead and after him. Now we will enter the period of turbulence and the transitional period between two epochs, the new epoch itself yet. After Trump would happen something. For instance, we should next year probably will be closer to understanding if, interestingly enough, Donald Trump would try to stay as American president in 2028, 29. Now it seems quite impossible because of American Constitution and the 22nd Amendment to it. But maybe some emergency mechanisms would be brought on the table in American politics. We'll see it, how Donald Trump would cope with his primary task to win the congressional elections next year and what would be done next. We see now this transitional period is a very good time for different dictators and autocrats, even in full-scale democracies, from Hungary to Israel, or to Bibi Netanyahu, are definitely planning to stay in power for ages without any traditional limitations. All this would show itself very bluntly and openly in the coming year, and of course it's a very difficult period of turbulence, during which we cannot rely on any rules that existed for decades before, at least since November 1989, when the America-centric world was born on the relics and the remains of the Berlin Wall.
Right. And as long as we're talking overall about 2025, what is your take on Europe? I mean, is Europe really preparing for a long confrontation with Russia, or just it pretending to be ready?
Now, Europe is not ready, at least. First and foremost, psychologically, because Europe is still greatly shocked by that tectonical shift from America-centric world under the conditions of which Europe felt itself cozily enough under the security umbrella of the United States, to the new world where Europe and America are competitors, and not allies anymore. And potentially Europe is objectively prepared for such competitions, but psychologically he is not. Because this generation of leaders is so accustomed to this cozy America-centric world that it cannot get rid of the stereotypes of the past. And of course, the idea to be prepared with big war with Russia could put the European Union together and help to reinvent the United Europe, to work out the concept permanent to this very era, this very time, not previous period of European history. But at the same time, Europe, being to a certain extent in panic, cannot concentrate on the priorities of this concept. For instance, it's quite clear that the new war and this dreadful Ukrainian war shows this, would be the war of drones, robots, and artificial intelligence. In this way, Europe requires first and foremost the liberalization and deregulation of the sphere, but we do not observe any consecutive steps toward it. Vice versa, the new regulations, tough regulations, which make Europe incompetitive in this field of artificial intelligence and IT at all. Even if compared with China, not to talk about the United States. And Trump policies are very consecutive to liberalize artificial intelligence. And in this sense, Donald Trump is quite right about the priorities of coming era. And so Europe should focus itself on what is the new modern reality, post-modern reality, post-American reality. And let's be hopeful that 2026 would bring such understanding to European elites, or create the preconditions for some elite changes in Europe, which help the continent to reinvent itself, to remember that European Union is first very lucrative, association of countries. Secondly, potentially very strong, but very, very much weakened, being now disillusioned about his previous key partner, the United States.
And coming back to the question about what illusion Russia is trying to sell to the world. Well, Russia keeps selling strength to the world, and while fighting with the patched-up tools and exhausting its own society. For how long do you think Russia will still be going to fool the world with its fairy tale?
As far as the world is prepared to listen to it. And because Vladimir Putin positions itself as a protector of some conservative values, which has nothing to do with modern Russian reality, but still Russian propaganda in this field is efficient enough. And secondly, Vladimir Putin reminds us that in 2014, starting this war against Ukraine and through and by Crimea annexations and excesses in Donbass, he betted on the end of America-centric world. He betted on zero in this geopolitical casino, and in such way has won. And thus, he is trying to show the world that he's still a very successful president who could anticipate the march of historical events. And his ability to capitalize on that anticipation is very mainly connected with the efficiency of authoritarianism and totalitarianism. Vladimir Putin is trying to prove to many countries and leaders that let's be autocrats, let's get some away from the illusions of the democracy, which was considered as a priority of the mankind after the Second World War. And now, especially being relatively successful on Ukrainian fronts and getting the unexpected support from Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin is relatively successful in his propaganda campaign. How stable the world could be to it, how can different forces, first and foremost European Union, resist this propaganda. We'll see in 2026. It wouldn't be easy, of course, but I'm still hopeful that the free world, remembering what its values really are and how important it is to protect those values, could be potentially efficient to counterbalance this enormous Putin's propaganda campaign and trying to spread the values of autocracy, values of totalitarianism, as is so attractive for the world.
Stanislav, you often think in images. No, it's better to say in metaphors. You're always explaining something within metaphors. So imagine this. You are asked to design the cover of The Economist. You know they're always doing the cover for the next year, what the main trends will be presented. So the issues that captures global trends for 2026. What would it be in the picture, if you would be a designer, will that be one symbol for 2026? One scene, one person, many personalities. What would you definitely put there and why?
I think the number one person should be Joker, or his analogue, the pagan god Loki of Scandinavian mythology, because Loki is a very trickster, very close to Trump. Götterdämmerung, it's called in German. I don't remember how it's called in English.
Right.
So the Götterdämmerung is what we are surviving now. And around this Loki is many signs of this transitional period from artificial intelligence to the longevity as the super idea of the modern elites.
And finally, thank you for that one. That was quite an interesting take on that one. And the last one, what is one thing the West must not do in 2026 from your perspective?
Let's remember that there is no more solid West anymore. There are different Wests. But I'm very hopeful that West would not believe in 2026 that authoritarianism and totalitarianism are really more efficient than democracy. It's a basic task.
Well, that's brilliant. I think that's all for now, Stanislav. Thank you so much for being with our audience throughout 2025, and I hope to see you again in 2026. But for now, thank you so much for being with us.
And at your disposal and many successes in coming years. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.